In the city of Düsseldorf, a man slips into a drab glass office on Heinrichstraße. He is dressed sharply, polished leather shoes, crisp suit, tie just tight enough to impress, but loose enough to feel comfortable. He heads straight to a desk piled high with financial records, computer printouts, and the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. With one practiced motion, he slides a stack of papers into a folder, then carefully lays them on his boss's desk. His boss, unaware, glances at his watch, signs his name, and hands back the folder. Immediately, the man erupts into quiet triumph. Within these seemingly innocent documents lies the power to siphon off 36 million Deutsche Marks, an amount so staggering in 1980 that it could buy dozens of small businesses or build entire apartment blocks. But he is not acting alone. Half the fortune is already routing to an accomplice. By month's end, the bear will board a Concorde flight laden with 16 suitcases stuffed full of cash, bound for Brazil. This is the real story of how two men, Gunther Schottnatschew and Manfred Vohwinkel, pulled off one of Germany's boldest corporate heists against the retail giant Metro AG. Their story will unravel into one of the most talked about fraud cases of its era. It took forged signatures, a globe-trottling escape, and a relentless manager on their tail to finally catch them. But before we get into the high-speed chase that spans oceans and continents, we need to understand who these men were and why Metro's sprawling empire was about to become their personal ATM. In a city known for its banks, trade shows, and riverside promenades, Gunther was just another cog in Metro's vast corporate machine. Born in 1941, he had grown up in post-war Germany, witnessed the Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle as they called it, and dutifully climbed the ladder at Metro's finance department. By 1980, he was a mid-level financial controller, respected by colleagues, married to his work, trusted by managers. So trusted, in fact, that his boss handed him a personal identification number to handle bank transactions with minimal oversight. Meanwhile, Manfred was living a quieter life. He had met Gunther through mutual friends in Düsseldorf's social circles. Rumor has it they bonded over shared tastes in jazz records and a restless ambition that didn't quite fit within the day's polite professional ranks. Manfred had some banking experience, but nothing that hinted at the audacity of what he and Gunther would soon attempt. To anyone outside their private circle, they were two average men, friends, flushed by the possibilities of the booming West German economy, but still tethered to the conservative norms of the era. But under that veneer of normalcy lay a plan that would shock the world. Gunther had access. He had a signature authority, the PIN, and an intimate knowledge of how Metro's bank accounts functioned. Manfred, on the other hand, knew how to handle large sums of cash discreetly. Together, they formed a partnership built on mutual trust and a shared belief that they could get away with it if they moved fast and kept everyone in the dark. People close to them would later say they seemed almost thrilled by the risk. Not in a reckless way, but with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've found a loophole no one else has noticed. And it was precisely that certainty, knowing exactly how the system worked, that would drive their plan forward. So how did they plan to steal millions without raising red flags? Stay tuned, because to see how they did it, we need to look at Metro from inside. Metro AG in 1980 was a fortress of modern retail. Its headquarters in Düsseldorf housed a maze of offices, trading floors, and financial controllers. The company's rapid growth after merging with two other big market players meant its revenue streams were massive, and so were the amounts moving in and out of its bank accounts. Gunther's role in the finance department was not glamorous, but it was crucial. He managed intercompany transfers, supply payments, and payroll. He reported directly to his superior, who trusted him so implicitly that he shared his handwritten signature stamps and a PIN for the bank terminal. No one thought to question why Gunther occasionally stayed after hours, or why he asked a few extra questions about account balances. Starting in March 1980, Gunther began forging his boss's signature on internal documents that authorized funds transfers. Each day he would create a fake transfer order to an account registered in Manfred's name. Over 4 months, he executed 31 transactions, each one between 800,000 and 1.5 million Deutsche Marks, totaling just over 36 million. Here's how it worked in practice. Gunther would draft a transfer order on a standard Metro form. He would replicate his boss's signature to perfection. No one at the time used digital verification, so a forged scroll passed as genuine. The documents went to Metro's bank, the Landesbank, which processed the transfers without question because they came from an approved Metro account with the proper signatures and PIN. Meanwhile, Manfred was already waiting in the wings. Once the money landed in his account, he would visit various branches of Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank, always in Düsseldorf, always during peak hours to blend into the crowd. He would request 6-figure cash withdrawals, often in batches of 200,000 to 300,000 marks. Tellers rarely batted an eye. After all, high rollers did exist, and many executives at Metro handled large sums when funding new store openings or paying suppliers abroad. And by the time Metro's accountants noticed a discrepancy, the couch in the living room of Manfred's apartment was bulging with wads of cash. But despite their precision, cracks would begin to appear. Metro's auditors ran routine checks in July and August in 1980, only to find their balances off by millions. The company had grown so fast that internal finance teams were stretched thin. They chalked the early shortfall up to a bookkeeping error. Then came August 1980, when the gap jumped from few million to over 30. That's when suspicion sat in. Yet even with auditors digging into ledger entries, Gunther and Manfred stayed one step ahead. They paced themselves, withdrawing funds gradually, just enough to sail under Metro's radar. So when Metro's CFO first realized something was seriously wrong, they still had no idea who to blame. But a small clue would come from an unexpected source, which was the internal bank memos. And that revelation would set Metro on a collision course with its own rogue employee. But before we get to that, let's see how Gunther and Manfred were living the high life overseas. By September 1980, Gunther and Manfred had withdrawn close to 20 million Deutsche Marks. Instead of hiding out in a dingy flat, they moved with surprising style. They left Düsseldorf slipping onto a train bound for Paris. From there, they booked tickets on a flight to Rio de Janeiro. Why Rio? Brazil in 1980 was a hotbed for expatriate Germans. Many ran cafe plantations or worked for tech startups. The country's booming economy offered discrete opportunities for foreigners looking to park money abroad. Gunther and Manfred set up shell companies under false names, claiming to be sports equipment dealers and tourist consultants. They leased a modest but comfortable apartment overlooking Copacabana Beach. Each morning, they would sip coffee at a sidewalk cafe, read the newspaper, and pretend to be typical tourists. But the real fashion statement was their cash. Imagine 16 large suitcases, each packed with bundles of 1,000 D-mark notes, neatly strapped, labeled, and weighed to avoid exceeding airline limits. They didn't smuggle everything on a single flight. They trickled the luggage in over multiple trips. On one Concorde flight that wasn't fully booked, airline staff glanced at the suitcases, saw space in the cargo hold, and simply shipped them off to Brazil. No one asked questions. Once in Brazil, it wasn't just about hiding cash. They splurged on luxury hotels in Rio, weekends gateway to Poços, nights at jazz clubs where sultry singers crooned in Portuguese. They bought a decades-old Mercedes-Benz, had it shipped by sea, and roamed the streets of Rio like local celebrities. Back in Düsseldorf, Metro had finally noticed. Tens of millions were gone, and no sign of simple bookkeeping error remained. But they had nothing to tie to any individual, so the company deployed a manager few knew by name but everyone respected, Hans-Jörg Hereth. He wasn't a detective, but he was the head of Metro's internal audit team and had a reputation for uncommon persistence. Before tracking them down, though, Metro needed proof of wrongdoing. Enter the bank internal communications and the dubious signature that didn't quite match Gunther's boss. But how would Metro get these memos? And once they had them, how could they turn them into a solid lead? It was late August when Metro's accounting team finally put two and two together. A stroke of the pen on a signature didn't align with the usual scroll of Metro's finance director. A junior accountant flagged it, but the boss initially waved it off. But by September, missing millions could not be ignored. Hereth, the head of internal audit, compared each forged document to genuine signatures. He traced every wire transfer to the very bank branches in Düsseldorf. He bored over surveillance camera log, and he discovered that a single clerk, Gunther Schornatschew, had authorized each transfer. By mid-September 1980, Metro had all the evidence they needed, all pointing to Gunther. They contacted Interpol and the local police. Once they learned he had likely fled with large sums of cash, they suspected Brazil. But there was a complication. They did not yet know about Manfred. Metro only had Gunther on file. No one expected that another man, an accomplice, was waiting in Rio de Janeiro. To add to the challenge, Metro's board hesitated to go public. They feared a scandal would tank investor confidence and expose vulnerabilities in corporate controls. So they quietly funneled money into the hunt, hired private investigators, and even consulted an ex-detective who specialized in tracking missing persons across continents. The company was determined to recover the money without making headlines, at least not right away. Hereth spent weeks cross-referencing flight manifests, hotel registries, and shipping logs. He learned that a German Concorde passenger with the alias J. Hoffman had boarded in Paris. The flight wasn't fully booked, perfect for slipping 16 suitcases without raising eyebrows. By November 1980, Metro believed they knew Gunther was hiding in Rio. But where exactly? A tiny apartment on Rua Parata Ribeiro? A luxury penthouse on Ipanema? And how could they get concrete proof? Hereth needed someone on the ground, someone who would pass off as a tourist and blend in with expatriates. That's when Metro enlisted the help of a private eye from Sao Paulo. Armed with cash and a cover story involving coffee imports, he began visiting hotels and cafes, asking about Germans who spent without care. Within days, he got a tip. 2 men living under false names, indulging every whim, carrying more luggage than tourists needed. But Rio was just the first stop. Things would get more complicated once Gunther tried to shake off suspicion by slipping into Paraguay. Tracking fugitives across continents is no small feat, especially in 1980 when there was no internet, no GPS, and no social media to slip up on. For Metro, it meant relying on an army of paper records, phone calls to taxis in Brazil, and careful surveillance of airports. Harith was the man who coordinated it all. In Rio, the private eye spotted Gunther leaving at dawn. Quick inquiry revealed a Paraguay-bound flight scheduled for the next day. Paraguay at the time was known for its loose banking laws and weak extradition treaties. As soon as Gunther and Manfred landed in Asunción, they were greeted by minimal customs checks. They hopped into a waiting Land Cruiser and headed to a remote ranch owned by a shadowy German-Brazilian entrepreneur. It was almost comical if not for the fact that these men held enough to topple small governments if spent carelessly. So how did Metro's team close in? They sweetened the pot by dangling a finder's fee. Then came a stroke of luck. One of the local ranch workers overheard a heated argument between Gunther and Manfred. He whispered to a neighbor, who finally called local police, hoping to claim that finder's fee. Before midnight, Paraguayan officers surrounded the ranch. Manfred tried to slip away, but he tripped on a suitcase and landed face first in the grass. They cuffed both men without a struggle and took them in. Within 2 months, both men were back in Düsseldorf, handcuffed, exhausted, and broke. Yet the story didn't end at the airport. The court case would reveal shocking details, and once the trial started, people wondered who truly held the power. The corporate empire, or the man in the cubicle with a pen. The trial kicked off on December 1981. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, Metro executives, and curious citizens. Gunther and Manfred sat side by side, flanked by their lawyers. The prosecution laid out the facts: 31 transfers totaling 36.1 million D-marks, nearly 32 million recovered, leaving roughly 3.5 million unaccounted for. Witnesses included Metro's CFO, who looked shaken yet resolute, and Harith himself, the man who had pieced together the puzzle from Düsseldorf to Rio to Paraguay. He recounted the miles he traveled and the nights spent poring over documents. Then came Gunther's testimony. He claimed he acted alone, that Manfred was only a sympathetic friend. He insisted the transfers were meant to secure their future. Manfred's defense was simpler. He said, "I thought Gunther had the authority. I believe the accounts were meant for me." His sincerity couldn't mask the fact that he made no effort to question withdrawals of hundreds of thousands. When asked why he stored piles of cash in his apartment, he shrugged and said, "I didn't want to trust banks anymore." In the end, the court found both guilty. Gunther Schott-Natchev received 5 years for continued breach of trust and forgery of documents. Manfred Vohwinkel got 4 years for aiding and abetting. But that wasn't quite the final word. Their defense team appealed to the Federal Court of Justice, citing procedural errors, improper handling of evidence, flawed instructions to the jury. In 1982, the higher court overturned the verdict, sending the case back to the Landgericht Düsseldorf for a retrial. By late 1983, the new trial reaffirmed the convictions, and both men began serving their sentences at the Ulmer Höhe prison near Düsseldorf. Inside prison, Gunther spent his days writing. He authored a sensational book titled Das Metro-Millionen-Ding, Millionaire with Villain, which translates to The Metro Million Ending, Accidental Millionaire. Metro promptly obtained an injunction to prevent its publication, fearing it might reveal more embarrassing details about their internal controls. Meanwhile, in Germany's music scene, a synth-pop band called Constant Music released a single titled Shot the Metro Man.
I am the Metro Man, a winner and a Metro Man. I am the Metro Man, German, South American. I am the Metro Man.
The track satirized Gunther's flight to Brazil. It became an underground hit played in clubs from Hamburg to Munich. In autumn 1989, just months after his release on patrol for good behavior, Gunther fell ill with severe headaches. Doctors discovered multi-brain tumors, and by November he passed away at age 48. He died believing he was misunderstood, a man who only wanted a better life. Manfred, however, completed his sentence and emerged in 1985. He never regained the wealth he once held in his hands. Metro, on the other hand, used the stolen funds to bolster internal controls, installing photo ID badges, dual signature requirements for large transfers, random audits, and mandatory vacation time for finance staff, so no one person could control the books for long. Those changes became a template for many German corporations, serving as a warning. Trust is good, checks are better. As for Harith, Metro never paid him the finder's fee he believed he had earned. He argued that without his persistence, the fugitives would still be hiding in Paraguay or Brazil. But what happened to the missing 3.5 million Deutsche-Marks? Some say local bandits found a hidden stash in the ranch and sold it. Others claim certain corrupt officials quietly siphoned it before the police raid. No official records exist, and those who might know have long since died or moved on. So was it all worth it? Two men risked everything for a fortune that was almost entirely recovered. Metro regained most of its money and tightened its controls. In the grand scheme of things, the heist costed Metro close to 500,000 D-marks in legal fees, bail, and missed opportunities, not to mention the hit to its reputation. But if you ask Gunther and Manfred back then, they would say they briefly felt invincible, like they had beaten the system. And if you think you're safe because you work for a giant corporation, just remember, in 1980, Metro represented everything solid in German retail, and yet two men turned its vaults inside out. Metro survived, but not without scars. They created a culture of accountability that outlasted any single manager or employee, and learned that sometimes the biggest threats are sitting quietly in the cubicle next door. It remains a global retail titan on every continent, all because they learned a hard lesson in 1980. Always check the signature, always question the numbers, and always keep an eye on the man with the pen. So that's it for today's Q. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this video or picked up something new, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone. Your support is really appreciated. See you next time.